Welcome to the Interrupted Podcast. We are here to cut through the noise of life to give you the tools and knowledge you need to relentlessly pursue a life of truth, integrity, discipline, and adventure. Consider this day interrupted. Hey everybody, welcome to the Interrupted Podcast. It's your host, Steve Hallman. And again, this week, it is good to be with you. I trust that you're having a great week. And mine is off to a fast start. And I could say that for the entire year. Man, with the podcast, there's just so much coming at us so quick. We're growing at a great rate. The feedback, again, that I'm getting from all of you out there through the socials, through email, through the website is phenomenal. And with that momentum, we're able to get some incredible guests that are coming on the show. And when we get to it here in a minute, you're going to find out that today's show will not disappoint. I'm really excited to bring you this show. But I want to make sure that everybody's aware to be able to get in touch with me and to see everything that is going on with the Interrupted Podcast, with Interrupted Outdoors, with Interrupted Man. I want to just direct you right back to our website, www.interruptme.org, and that is going to be the home, the place for you to get everything that you are going to need to see what's going on with the Interrupted movement and any up-and-coming shows, and go back and listen to old shows that have already come out, and there's just so much wisdom that the guests that have come on have shared, and I just wouldn't want you to miss that. So I know if you're like me with podcasts, you like to kind of stay up with the latest and greatest show, the one that just came out, but don't miss going back to some of those old shows. And even if you listen to them once, listen to it again. There's a lot of wisdom to be gained from these guests that have just lived extraordinary lives, men and women who just have that growth mindset, high-performing people that want to continue to improve their lives. So definitely make sure you check out that website again, www.interruptme.org, for all the information that you're going to need for everything going on with the show. If you have a guest in mind, definitely reach out to me. Send me an email, steve@interruptme.org, and that is going to be a place that I can connect with you and any guests that are looking to come onto the show. So without any further ado, let's get right into this show today. I heard our guest today on a show that all of you are probably familiar with, Black Rifle Company's Free Range America podcast, and his name is Tim Pachasa. He goes by Chachi, and like many of you, I heard this man on that podcast. I had a friend reach out to me and say, Steve, you have got to get this guy on the show. And I listened to it, and I was like, man, I agree. His message, what he's putting out, his leadership company, which is Cape Lead, that's C-A-P-E Lead, Cape Lead. He's got an incredible website. We're going to link everything up in the show notes. But an incredible story with his military career, and now what he's transitioned and is teaching people all over the world through coaching, through his website, through his podcast, the Cape Lead podcast. There's just a lot coming out from Chachi that is going to benefit you and add great value to what you have going on in your life. So let me just take a minute to introduce Chachi to you. He is a Chief Master Sergeant, and he has 24 years as an Air Force veteran, and he has spent the majority of his career calling in airstrikes for Army units. He currently serves as the principal enlisted advisor to his commander on the joint application of firepower in three-dimensional battle space in support of the 1st Cavalry Division and 3rd Cavalry Regiment operations. Chachi also advises the commander on all military readiness, morale, quality of life, and professional development for 220 assigned personnel spanning 13 Air Force specialties. And he entered the Air Force in August of 1994 and graduated from the Tactical Air Command and Control Apprentice course at Hurlburt Field, Florida, in September 1995. His background includes various duties in the Army and Air Force echelons, including Special Operations Forces, NATO Formal Training School, Wing Senior Enlisted Leadership positions, and Major Command Staff. And through his career, he's filled with a myriad of roles, including additional duty First Sergeant, and is a master-rated parachutist With over 200 static line and military free-for-all jumps, his assignments include North Carolina, Colorado, Texas, Kansas, Hawaii, and New Jersey. Chachi also served overseas in Germany, South Korea, Kuwait, and has deployed in support of Operation Southern Watch, Iris Gold, Joint Forward, Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, Spartan Shield, and Inherent Resolve. And prior to assuming his current position, he served as the command chief for both the 305th Air Mobility Wing at Joint Base McGuire, Dix Lakehurst, New Jersey, and the 386th Air Expeditionary Wing in Southwest Asia. He created Cape Lead as a way to bring a modern common sense approach to emerging leadership styles, and wants to help leaders go home at the end of the day knowing 5 things: that they did what they could with what they had at the time, regardless of the environment and whether they wanted to or not. He hopes that leaders can gain some peace of mind by acknowledging those questions, and he wants to spend his life helping others become even better leaders. And man, that's going to come and shine through as you get to hear him speak. And we cover a wide variety of topics. He tells his story about some of the time in the military and how that has evolved and changed in those experiences growing up, and what he's able to do both for all his clients, his coaching clients now, the many organizations that he's privileged to work with, and in all his leadership roles that he takes on, as well as taking that time for his most important mission, which is his family, which we had a good time talking about as well. I am incredibly grateful that Chachi joined me on this show, and it's because of all of you out there that are giving a lot of feedback and that are helping get this show more visible, that I just have the privilege of bringing men like Chachi on this show. So let me hear from you at the end of this show. Make sure you touch base with Chachi. Let him know some of the things that you were able to take away. Communicate. All of the folks out there that are putting content out, whether it be on the socials or through podcasts, that are trying to put that positive message out there, we need to make sure that they hear you and that they feel your support, because we just need more positivity and more instruction. And hey, all of this is free, right? This is a time that you, whether you're in your car or whether you're at home, get some information and apply it to your lives to improve and make yourself more capable and more ready to deal with all the interruptions that are going to come up. And so we are going to do this together. I am learning right alongside of you, and I learned so much from Chachi, and I look forward to a long friendship with him. And hey, maybe in the future we'll get to have him back on the show, because I know I'm going to hear from you, and there's going to be lots of requests for that. But I also, right before we get into the show, want to remind you that it is the new year. I told you some content was going to be coming out on YouTube, so you'd be able to tune in and actually see the guests, and that is no different here. If you go over to the Interrupted Podcast YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the interview with Chachi, and I'll get that linked up and on the page as well. So thank you for listening, and enjoy this conversation with Tim Pachasa. Tim Pachasa, how you doing, brother? Thanks for coming on.
How about yourself?
Oh man, I am good. This is an exciting moment for the podcast. Reaching out to someone like yourself, and in the times that we're in right now, and we're obviously going to get into it here. That's the goal, but just the content you're pushing out, and the messaging, and the way that I believe you're already helping so many people. I was really excited to bring your message to the audience. So again, I'm humbled by you taking the time to sit down with me.
No, I'm humbled that a fellow podcaster would reach out saying, "Hey, I kind of like this message." And so, you and I getting to trade spots on each other's, I think helps everybody out. And the more we could share our respective messages, the better we'll be for it. It'll be for everybody.
100%, man. Well, I can't wait to get into your story, but I really want to hear from you. How's the year started off for you? Like, how are you doing in the midst of, having podcasts and leadership information, and the world feeling like it's just spinning so quickly in the age of media? How are you doing, man, with 2021?
So first off, and you and I hardly knowing each other at all, that's probably the best question I've ever heard in any interview. Like a truly legitimate, kind, caring concern for another human being.
I appreciate that, man.
Thank you for doing that. I think the world needs more of that. And so many of my mentors are teaching some of the mindfulness and mental skills training to do that. So number one, I appreciate the honest care and concern. But so far, 2021 it's been great. It has to be better than 2020. But 2020 saw a lot of changes in my life. Whether it was quitting 2 separate jobs and just diving into what I do full time, or welcoming the birth of my 3rd son when I was 44, now I'm 45, and buying a house here in Phoenix and putting down roots. And so everything's really on the up and up. I've got a healthy family. I've got a happy family, and that's good enough for me.
Hey, congratulations on that. No, it's exciting to be adding to the family, and I'm sure that's a learning curve again. I don't feel like you ever just get it perfect. I got 3 young ones, and it's constant. So, hey, man, congrats. That's exciting. And I'm glad to hear that enthusiasm in your voice as a parent. Truly, man. Like, this isn't necessarily what we were going to talk about, but so many fathers out there, it becomes a very fake message of, I got another child, whether it's a son or a daughter, and it kind of ends there. But there has to be some genuine, authentic enthusiasm in having these kids that, quite frankly, is our biggest mission, to lead them and to teach them. And if we can't lead at home, and Lord knows I fail every day, it feels like, but it doesn't stop me from wanting to learn from people like you and pull in as much, have as much input as possible in the conversation. So right on, man. That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to go on some of the conversations I've heard you have with others and from your own podcast that I've been listening to. Some really cool stuff. But I'd love to hear a foundation and kind of take it back a little bit to if you could just give us a little bit of where you grew up, your family of origin, some of what you got to see as a child and a young man, and maybe some of the influences that will get us up to where you're at today. If you'd be willing to share some of that, I'd love to hear a little bit of your story.
Yeah. It's a kind of like I feel like I'm your average everyday American kid kind of story. But my father was a civil engineer, and he had different jobs. So I moved around a lot. Not a military brat. Just moved around a lot with his job. Born in Fargo, North Dakota. Then we lived in like Delaware, and then like outside Minneapolis. And then Bismarck, and then we moved to Southern California, and that was all before I was 6. So I did all my elementary school in Southern California in Orange County, and then from there we moved to Kansas City, Missouri in 1988, where my family still is today. So huge shout out to the Kansas City Chiefs for that amazing win yesterday. Which now I was raised a Browns fan because my father was born and raised Cleveland.
I'm sorry.
So we moved around a lot. The one constant was Cleveland sports. So I love my Browns, but I do love the Chiefs as well. So pretty excited for an epic Super Bowl.
Heck yeah.
And we could talk more about the leadership dynamics of football and all the analogies.
Yeah. There's probably a couple in there.
Yeah, right. But then for me, like growing up in high school, like my freshman year is when Desert Storm happened. And I remember every morning, and I'd watch the news, and I knew the sortie count for what the planes that were flying. I couldn't tell you what a sortie was, right? I had no idea. But I was counting. I knew what was going on. So my freshman year was probably that first look of, hey, I think maybe the military, and specifically the Air Force, could be in it for me.
Okay.
And then my senior year, 2 months into my senior year, that's when Black Hawk Down happened.
Wow. Okay.
And so, I couldn't even point on the map where Somalia was. I didn't know where Mogadishu was. And so I'm watching this, and like, I didn't know that we had Army Rangers there, and we had Delta Force, and then we had some Spec Ops Air Force. Like there's some, and so I graduated high school, joined the Air Force, became a TAC-P, and just wanted to jump out of planes. And so my career field's calling in airstrikes for Army units. And so was super hella mega blessed to get to do that for nearly my entire career. And my assignments went from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to Camp Casey in South Korea, to Fort Carson in Colorado Springs, to Hohenfels Army Installation, Germany, to a training center there.
Wow,
and then to Fort Bliss, Texas, in El Paso.
Okay.
And then I went to a different place in Korea at Osan Air Base. And then I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, in Manhattan. And then I went to Hawaii. So that was a good deal there. From there, I went to New Jersey at Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst. From there, I went downrange to a deployed environment, and then finally retired out of Fort Hood, Texas, in the summer of 2019.
Man, you have seen some territory.
And like, that's not counting the other deployments, and we call them TDYs, and or business trips, going on, and stuff like that. But it's a very, very, I would say, humble beginnings. Quite honestly, I'm from like an upper middle class family. Uh, my friends, I had a car when I turned 16, and not
Mhm.
many of my friends in the military did that. So on the scale, right, I was in a very affluent neighborhood and or upbringing, but
Yeah.
it wasn't. That's not necessarily how I saw it. But so then, but I knew I couldn't go to college. I was just too
Mm.
immature. I needed structure. I needed somebody to watch over me, and I would have killed it. And so the military was the answer for me.
Yeah, was there someone speaking into your life and helping you with that self-awareness that it sounds like now you articulate really well that comes out? Was there some major influences that maybe really sat you down or maybe had to talk to you a little bit, or is that just a character trait that you exhibited early on?
So that was a small glimpse of a failed maturity that I've lacked throughout my
Oh,
entire
okay.
life. Like, but in the and my parents, Andy and Nancy, just phenomenal people, and they give me tons of credit. Like, they're like, it is amazing that, as immature as you were, that you were mature enough to make that decision,
Mhm.
is just absolutely unreal. So they were very thankful that I put myself on this path, that it was my choice, and that I knew internally that I needed structure, I needed some guidance, I needed some ground rules into adulthood. And so, yeah, it was just a very right place, right time type of decision for me, and very thankful for it.
Yeah. How did you embrace that going into the military where you're entering that structure if maybe you didn't have as much of that in terms of your natural um uh um, you know not gonna say necessarily character, that's a little different than that, but just what you've experienced up until that point where you kind of hit that wall and that framework. Did you realize what you were getting into? Had you spoken to people that were in the military at that point, or did it hit you pretty hard?
That is such a phenomenal question, because even if you're what we call brats, right? If you're raised in a military family and your parents traveled around, we call you a brat. Even if you were a brat, you don't know what it's like to wear the uniform until you put on the uniform, right? You don't know what it's
Mm.
like until you go to basic training, or until you hit your initial thing, and you're just kind of thrown to the wolves, and like, hey, this is now your life. Like, in one day, you take a flight or catch a bus, and boom, you're gone.
Yeah.
So it was funny. I'm going to say this. It was my expectation, right? We'll talk more about that
Yeah,
later.
100%.
But I knew that there was going to be structure. I knew that I was going to be
Mhm.
told what to do, and I was going to have to comply and or conform, right?
Huh.
And that's
Okay.
more of a philosophical argument that I've been teasing out throughout my entire career. So that was absolutely fine. I knew that's what I needed. That's what I signed up for, and it's what I got.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Right on. That. Now, did you experience any of that? Did you do team sports or anything through high school? Did you have that kind of camaraderie and working towards a goal? Just what you had
Yeah.
experienced, even
Uh,
in terms of resiliency at that point of your life.
you bet, right? And so, like, sports are so amazing for so many reasons, and a lot of kids today don't like sports. They want to stay at home with their electronics, and really not do much.
Yeah.
But again, you have to take those. You really need to know what it's like to be on a team. What happens when one person loses it for the team? What happens when you lose it for the team? What happens when someone else wins it for the team, or when you win it for the team, and experience those highs and lows? And so I did a lot of that. I played nearly every sport growing up. In my freshman year in high school, I played football. I was on the dive team, and then I did track and field for pole vault,
Oh, right
and I
on.
lettered in diving. So I quit all the other sports and just focused on that for the rest of my high school
Wow, that's interesting. Right on. Right on. Was that big where you grew up?
year. Yes, and no. I mean, it was there, right? So
Okay.
it had to be on. I know so many people, like, your high school had a swim and dive
Yeah.
team.
Well, that's kind of where I'm from, out near Philadelphia, where I went to high school and stuff. And I know there was swimming and stuff, but didn't hear a lot about it.
Yeah, yeah. So, and a lot of my friends tease me, but that was hey, it wasn't necessarily big, but there were a lot of club and or community swim teams
Okay.
all around the greater metropolitan Kansas City area.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you wanted to find a sport, you can easily find it, and swimming is relatively pronounced there.
Yeah. No, the reason I bring that up is because, I mean, my wife and I are having the conversation right now with our oldest, who's 6, and uh, that is, other than the home, the first place kids are starting to encounter that leadership in terms of more overt, where you have subordinates and you have superiors, and there is a chain of command structure, as loose as it might be compared to the military or law enforcement. But that's where you begin to experience it, and I think a lot of personality dynamics start to really evolve there. And for me, I struggled with the high school sports where I didn't like to be told what to do. And it was rooted, now I can see that it was rooted in the fact that I hated letting my coaches down or my team down. And I didn't manage that very well in high school sports. And so it's all that to say, is there any lesson or a specific instance where you can see that whether it was a leader or you as a follower, something that you remember that maybe has carried through from those days?
It was very interesting because for my coaches, Susie Proctor was my dive coach, and
Okay.
then Doug Earnhardt was the swim coach. And I remember coming on as a freshman, and Susie didn't show up till my sophomore year. I just felt weird and out of place, and not knowing what to do. I'd never been on a swim team or dive team
Okay.
before. I was at the neighborhood pool diving and doing a bunch of flips and stuff, and different kinds of flips and
Okay.
inwards and reverse gainers, right? And so all my friends like, you should go out for the dive team. So I remember just being there. I remember meeting Doug Earnhardt and him just pulling me aside, like, "Hey, welcome to the team, Pachasa. Right? We're happy to have you." And then he loved saying my last name. Right? It was always Pachasa, and he was just. So that was one of my first understandings of leadership. And then the friend group that I had in high school,
Hmm.
I don't think we give our friends enough credit for being mentors, because my friends Ben Cohera, Josh Henderson, David Cheshire, and now Ben's wife Mara, right? These four people continue to shape my life.
Wow.
And like
Hey.
growing up with
Yeah.
them, all different personalities, all different likes and dislikes and skills and gosh, positives and negatives and everything in between.
Yeah.
But the combination of those four people being in my life continue to this day to mold who I am. And it's a whole lot of fun.
Oh, that's pretty cool that you're able to even land on that even now as something that's, really important to you. Not many people have that, especially in the amount that you've seen the world and have moved around, that you still have that foundation where you can connect to people. Right on. Well, in the military, what was something that maybe in the same vein as the teams where uh, did you recognize very early the type of leadership that you did well under?
Uh, that's a gosh, that's another great question. No, but I recognize the antithesis, right? So
Okay.
I didn't realize the environment that helped me grow. I just knew the environment that was stifling to me.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Which is kind of what I found out early when I first got there. And it was funny, like talking with JT on that podcast,
Yeah.
because there is the new guy hazing that has to happen, right? And you bring a new guy in, know that he's part of a brotherhood, but he's got to work it right. It's a meritocracy. You
Yeah.
need to
Yep.
earn every single second.
Trust and credibility. Yep.
Trust, and so a lot of that you can really only find out through hazing, right? As shitty as that sounds. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, you really need to beat some people up,
yeah.
not literally,
No,
but
I
perhaps,
yeah,
right?
I hear what you're
And,
saying.
and
Yeah.
so I mean, you really need to push people, and that's fair and that's fine. That's all well and good. But then I also witnessed kind of the extreme part of that too, where for no good reason I was harassed, and or I was treated like crap, like for no other reason other than I was a new guy.
Yeah.
And so, some of the stuff I was talking about with JT was like, hey, I wish somebody would have just pulled me aside, like, yeah, like, you know what? One day we think you're going to be great in this
Hmm.
career field. One day we think you're going to be one of the senior leaders of the career field and in the United States Air Force. And your development starts right now, right? And I didn't get that.
Hmm. That takes a lot of foresight. Yeah.
It does take a lot of foresight. And again, realistically, I'm not blaming those guys. That wasn't the military that they grew up in, right? And perhaps I was part of this kinder, gentler type of thing, but I don't necessarily see it in those ways.
Mhm.
Again, I just think about deconstructing the military mindset and the understanding of the way we've led for thousands of years inside a military construct has gone the way of the dodo. And we need to do full stop. And if there's anything that we were doing prior to September 11th that we're still doing, we need to stop it immediately. Like,
Interesting.
absolutely, so much has changed. So much of the world dynamic, so much with technology and communication and global efforts and minimal. There's just so much that we just need to just upend, hit the reset button, and then reattack. And so I've been focusing on that since I was a young airman showing up there at Fort Bragg, and that's just continued to grow throughout my career.
Right on. What was your first leadership role where it was you actually are now given this title and you need to do something with it?
Yeah, so that was fair. Like when I first became a sergeant, I was a sergeant of one. I wasn't leading anybody. So it wasn't until I moved to Korea for the first time where I got my first supervisees, right? And I got the first people that ended up working for me.
Yeah.
And so where I was, in charge with a lot of that stuff. And so that was a very interesting time frame because you think you're seeing the big picture
Mhm.
and you're just not. You don't have the capacity to see it. So I'm going to go, the uniforms are important and haircuts are important and you do what I tell you to and you get that done and you're going to find success and that's great. But again, it was that obedience versus discipline thing. And so I screwed up a lot. And thankfully my bosses allowed me to screw up a lot in leading these people. They were great lessons learned, good growth opportunities, and I'm thankful for them. But it's funny because I remember at 18, I absolutely, without a doubt, knew everything in the world. And
Yeah.
then now at 45, I know less now than I knew at 18. Like I know wholeheartedly how much I don't know in the world, and it's terrifying.
And we're very much so aware of it.
Yeah, again, like life slaps you in the face with it every damn day.
Yeah. Hey, would you take a moment and just uh, dive in and flesh out a little bit the obedience and discipline? And I love some of the parallels and basically how you've talked about that. I think it brings a lot of clarity to that, and it's something to be mindful of, whether you're leading your family or leading in your vocation.
You bet, and it's funny because like I've gotten a lot of great questions in since that interview with JT came
Yeah,
out.
it
No,
was it
apparently
was a
nobody had heard
highlight. It
this,
it really
or I'm one of
was.
the first people to kind of hopefully tie these two concepts together. But for everybody out there, it's when people look to the military as an example for leadership,
Mhm.
that's absolutely righteous, right? If leaders in the military can lead people maybe unto their death, right? Then they're probably doing something right. And there's some skills, there's some leadership understanding that we should probably acquire and replicate that as it makes sense.
Mhm.
Well, the problem is that from the dawn of warfare up until like September 11th, there were reasons why the military had to do what it had to do. And a lot of this revolves around what we call discipline is, hey, I give you orders, you go execute, you go take that hill, all right, and that's it. You go take the hill. You don't ask why. Well, why was a bad question forever. And huge
Mm.
thanks to Simon Sinek for bringing that to the
Yeah,
forefront
yeah.
and showing exactly how powerful why is. But the thing is, the things that people I think in the military don't understand is why did we have to do it that way
Mhm.
and why can we not do it that way anymore? Because if you look at the communication and technology limitations on any battlefield, again from the dawn of mankind up until September 11th, was we had these huge force on force, big bodies of people, high intensity conflict, and so for your commands, you needed to listen for a bugle call. You needed to see like a flag raised, right? All these different mediums that we had, and again, it wasn't great, but you did what you had with what you had to do what you had at the time with what you could work with, and and that was just so frustrating. So that made sense where people need to be specifically trained to hear a command and then execute said command. And the
Mhm.
argument that I've made is that is not discipline at all. That
Mm.
is obedience. And there's a lot of people who kind of thumb their nose at that concept. There's a lot of people who resonated with that concept. I've never thought about that. That does make perfect sense. And so we need to ask ourselves in a leadership role, what are we doing inside our respective teams to inspire discipline or promote discipline rather than just obedience? And I'm not talking blind obedience, right? But
Right.
if you're telling somebody to go do something and they do it, that's not discipline. That is obedience. And I don't mean it in a bad way. Even in the military, the leaders doing it today. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing because you need to have people with that skill as well. That when the stuff hits the fan, then you go out and execute the mission.
Yeah.
So there is a time and a place for that type of warfare. I'm not going to discount that. That being said, on a day in, day out, in garrison basis, we should probably understand the differences in those two words.
Yeah, 100%. And it goes to that. I guess the larger umbrella would be that commander's intent, where once you have that, now we're able to inspire people to problem solve and to be innovative in what they're trying to do to carry out the mission. Because I hear that a lot in my field. It's like you want the boots on the ground, that are seeing and need to evolve and adapt, to have the capacity and the capabilities to be able to do that. And when that doesn't happen, sometimes it works out. It does. It just, which is okay and great actually when it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. And you want to be able to trust those people that are able to act with a level of discipline and, I guess, fall back on their training, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense to me. And especially, and perhaps I'm just very lucky for having been in the Air Force for all those years, but only being assigned to Army units, right? So I've gotten to witness two different understandings of the practical application of warfare. And so the Air Force, which is largely a support service, we're there to support, we'll load you up in our planes and move you around the world wherever you need to go. Or once you're on the ground, we'll fly overhead and drop bombs wherever you want them dropped. So those are very interesting ways. The way the Air Force describes it is centralized control, decentralized execution. And I couldn't be more of a fan of that concept, right? Because it's one of those, like with my wife, she wants stuff done around the house. The rule is you can tell me what to do or how to do it, but you can't tell me both, right? I think all guys
take your pick.
Kind of have that one thing. But again, it's that, like, hey, if you want it done, I will absolutely go do it. I'll get the commander's intent. But it may not get done to your or what you like based off of our different understandings and different skill sets and however that. So commander's intent is absolutely great. And, the follow on through allows people to really push what's going on. And I talk about, I don't like the 5 W's, but it used to be like who, what, when, where, why, and how. People added the how. I've completely dropped that because Steve Jobs has a phenomenal quote that says it makes no sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. You hire smart people so they can tell you what to do.
Yeah, right.
And
on.
I absolutely subscribe to that.
Yeah, 100%. And so with the traditional 5 W's, how do we attack that then? What's the other way of looking at that?
So the thing is, and probably the biggest focal point for my study and my research and my understanding of leadership isn't leadership at all. It's just connection.
Okay.
Because leadership is a byproduct of a connection that I have with somebody. But in order to have that connection, I need to have a successful interaction. And in order for that interaction to be successful, I need to speak from a glossary, from a shared and common vernacular, and speak inside the construct of a communication infrastructure that makes sense. And so that's a very long-winded way. And the reason I bring this up is so many people, when they think about communication, they think in terms of passing in information. I hate it. But like we shouldn't think in terms of passing information because that's just lazy as it turns out. And if we can do better with just a simple twist, then that's great because I don't want us to pass information. I want us to lead expectations.
Okay.
And expectations is the most misunderstood word in the entire world.
But we hear it a lot.
And you hear it a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. And it makes the hair on my neck stand up. Everybody says it and nobody knows what they're talking about. And I mean this in all the best reasons. I'm not trying to be insulting. If you're one of those leaders who talks about expectation management 5 times a week, I was right there with you.
Okay.
But I'm here to tell you, you probably don't know what an expectation is. And all these people who say it, like, what's the difference between an expectation, an anticipation, an assumption, hope, right? Synonyms do not exist. Right? We need to strike synonyms because words have meaning. Or as my boss, Colonel Steve Hodge, would say, words is important.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that we just made everyone cringe in the English world.
Yeah, it just frames that concept so well. So again, like, talking to JT is like, hey, we need to be more purposeful with our words. If we really want to focus on leadership, we can't just focus on leadership.
Yeah.
And we really need to focus on, number one, just speaking with the right words and focusing our energy towards having a successful interaction towards us building some type of connection. And we'll just start there. So pedaling back to the whole 5 W's, the 5 W's is okay, right? But then Jim Collins says good is the enemy of great. And then Ben Franklin is, if better is possible, then good is not enough.
There you go.
And then so many times in the Air Force, whether we're talking about race stuff or whether we're talking about sexual assault, they're like, well, we're doing better. We're getting there. Like, okay, great. But let's not mistake better for good. And it's specific use of deliberate terms.
Yeah.
And so when we say 5 W's, we do the who, what, when, where, why. But the why, briefed at the end there, 99 times out of 100 only amplifies or modifies the what.
Okay.
And so if we're smart enough, again, so much we can talk about emotional intelligence, is don't brief who, what, when, where, why. Take out the why and add it to every level. So don't talk about the 5 W's, talk about the 8 W's. The who and why, where and why, what and why, when and why. That simple little twist in and of itself gives you a much more holistic understanding of the information that you're providing, or at a bare minimum, it's a good backstop for you to understand how much you know before you give guidance. Because if you can't answer those whys, you should probably research them.
And do you think that, I mean, I feel like our culture is terrified, and the millennial generation gets at a lot of that why seems like a pushback on authority. And I feel like it often gets crushed of like, why is everybody asking why? I told you to do something, let's execute it. There is a reason. And what do you, I mean, is it just rooted in fear or a challenge, or what do you think is behind that?
There's so many things that go along with it. But again, I just think it's this archaic understanding of what leadership is. And we just haven't adjusted our mindset. Because people will talk about millennials, right? They're the generation that's never been told no, and they always got a trophy, and they're always asking why. And people talk about all the bad. No one ever talks about the good that millennials bring to the table, right? Because millennials, they've never been told no, but so help me God, these people always know that there's a yes to be found.
Yeah,
and they're the people out there, and they're hunting down that yes, right? The whole trophy thing, my generation did that to them. They didn't have those trophies. Right?
Someone was leading them.
Our people, right? Who make a lot of that stuff happen. So like the whole, if you're a leader out there and you happen to be listening to this and you're offended when your people ask you why, just know that I hate you to my very core. Right? If you're that entitled, where you feel that you don't have to increase an organizational level of commitment and understanding, that you don't have to tell people why, and there's no room for you on this planet in a leadership role.
And granted, there's a timing element that comes in there.
Absolutely.
And nobody's saying that doesn't exist. And no, I love that. And when I heard you first talking about this, I think it was with JT, it made me immediately go to thinking about the amount, or let's take it back a little bit. Before the age of technology and everything's at our fingertips right now, we had to rely on experts. And when someone told you something, you didn't have the ability to necessarily challenge them unless you already had that knowledge.
You bet.
But now, if someone tells nearly anybody, particularly a younger generation, something, you're going to get fact-checked within minutes, if not seconds, as to what you said. And so the ability to get the correct or best practice answer, that spectrum or lead time is so much faster. Like, you don't have the wait time. And I go back to my time in teaching, and maybe you can get into this a little more, even talking about expectations. You always heard, for me as a student and then me as a teacher, when I did that, was expectations. You want to set high expectations. And how do you set high expectations? Well, you develop an objective. And once you have the objective, you have to say of what you want to accomplish, and then what basically the outcomes are going to be once you do that. Is that getting closer to what you're talking about, or is it a little bit different than that?
It is close. It is a phenomenal talking point, because I don't believe in high expectations. Because I think what we were just kind of, and again, because we need to focus on these words, I think we were confusing an expectation from a goal.
Okay.
And so goals, I mean, you can see it out there in a lot of business literature, where goals, you should have BHAGs, right? Big, hairy, audacious goals, right?
I love it.
So have those awesome goals, right? And reach for the stars. By all means, have those goals. Along the lines, have an expectation. And the reason I don't say high or low expectations is because if I have a high expectation of somebody, it's an unrealistic expectation. I want people to work in terms of realistic versus unrealistic expectation. But then you have to kind of peel that onion and pull that thread and realize, what is an expectation?
Yeah.
And how do we get to an expectation? And so, if you'll allow me, I'll just kind of get into that.
I would love for you to lay that out, because, and I think it ties even to the precise speech, because I think there's a lot of meaning people that throw these words around, including myself. I'm not going to say I'm above any of this, that we throw those words out there because they sound very lofty, but if they're not being received properly, they don't go anywhere.
Well, and then that's a little bit to your point, is like for the leaders who speak with some of these hollow words, what's called, who don't have much
that's a good way.
them, the people hear it and they're like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They hear some of these words and phrases with no bite to it, with no tangible representation of a distinct focus for where we need to go. And so there's so much that get lost in and of itself. And so one of the things that JT and I were talking about is this model for processing information, and it's called the DIKW model. It's not my model, but once I heard it, it was absolutely amazing. And so it's the way that we process information. And so you start with data, you get a data point that starts as data.
Okay.
More and more data becomes information. More and more data piles in, that information becomes knowledge. And then more and more comes in, that knowledge becomes wisdom. So I love that. I love that growth of how, and that's how I understand expectations, is because you start with hope, and then hope becomes assumption. Assumption becomes anticipation. Anticipation becomes an expectation. Mm-hmm. And the reason hope is first is, if you look at like the definition of hope. Well, I'm sorry, it took me 4 years to define these terms. And I think about these words every single day, like not hyperbole, every single day, right? I mean, it's unreal. And so they're all the same definition, with like a mix of like 3 or 4 words, because the definition of assumption is the thought or belief that an act or event should occur based on limited levels of information and or limited levels of past experience. And I think when people talk about assuming, right, that probably passes the common sense test.
Yep.
And then you get to anticipation, is the thought or belief that an act or event should occur based on varying levels of information and or varying levels of past experience. Okay, right? Because you can assume something or you can anticipate something. And most people that I talk to would readily admit that anticipation sounds more finite.
Yeah. Can I geek out for a minute on psychology a little bit?
Please.
So I feel like that would be the point anxiety and fear creep in.
Sure.
And failure can start to grow. Is that fair? I'm just trying to I'm trying to stay right with you, because I feel like that goes hand in hand.
So we kind of bring it back to that for the anxiety and fear, as far as how do you self-assess?
Okay.
Which how much revolves around this.
Yeah.
So,
right on.
So we'll get to that. And then the definition of expectation, right? We went from limited to varying, and now the definition of expectation is the thought or belief that an act or event should occur based on credible levels of information and or credible levels of past experience.
Okay.
So those are the 3 main definitions, but you'll also hear that I referenced hope first, because hope has the same definition of assumption with the added piece of, and also information to the contrary, right? Because you can, if you have a loved one who's going through alcohol and or drug rehab, right? You can assume that they're going to get out and be on the straight and narrow, or you can hope that they're going to do that. And the reason that hope is less finite than assume is because a lot of times we have evidence to the contrary that shows that this isn't going to happen, or this first time, it's just not going to take, it'll take multiple times going through this. And so we're able to go from hope to assume to anticipate to expect. And then getting back to your question, is every emotion is based on an expectation. If you're happy about something, right, then something exceeded whatever expectation you had on some level. If you're thrilled about something, it really exceeded, or you had no expectation of it to begin with. And this also works for the inverse, right? To where if you're frustrated or furious, something didn't meet your expectation on some level.
Yeah.
And once I put that together, and I was at this time already a chief master sergeant, I was a command chief inside the Air Force. And I realized how vital expectations were, and that all the expectations that I put out there was going to shape the mental health and peace of mind and mental well-being of my team.
Yeah.
Man, I realized what I had to start focusing on, and how clearly I needed to articulate expectations, and then realizing I didn't know what I was talking about when I was saying expectations. So again, like the whole peace of mind piece, if you're frustrated about something, I just ask that people exercise some emotional intelligence, take a step back and just ask yourself, okay, how much information did I have that said that person X was going to do thing Y?
Mm-hmm.
Or how much past experience did I have knowing that person X should have done thing Y? And if we ask those questions, a lot of times we're like, wow, I shouldn't really have expected that. Maybe I was anticipating or assuming that they were going to do that. And then once you train yourself to, and again, some of this you can only find out in hindsight, right? And that's absolutely fine. But you can come back and like, wow, turns out I didn't have as much information as I thought I did, or I didn't have as much past experience as I thought I did. So it's simply a lesson learned, and we can move forward from there.
Yeah, and we should be evaluating that anyway. That should be part, like if we're not evaluating that communication, how are you going to go forward?
100%. And then I think going back to your point of people who are so butthurt about this, like don't ask questions, don't ask why. Now, if I'm your boss and I tell you to go empty the trash can, don't ask me why. Go empty the effing trash can, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not trying to take that part. There are direct things that have to be done. Not trying to take away from a leader.
Right.
But if you're going in a new direction, you have a new client, you're going to produce a new widget, right? If you're going to change stream and you're going to change your client base, right? And people don't get it, you need to say why, right? And so when you can kind of peel this back and realize that, hey, maybe these things weren't as clear, and maybe I could have done this a little bit differently. That is really it. And again, you shouldn't. If you're mad that your people keep asking why, you should be mad that you haven't told them why ahead of time, because that just shows that they have the most limited level of organizational commitment ever.
There you go. Yeah, 100%. Well, that scaffolding to get to expectations goes, it all ties right into, you can see the breakdown so clearly when you talk about precise speech, because if you are not as a supervisor and someone that you're supervising, in that relationship, if you're using those words or not using those words, if you don't have a common definition of what each one is and where you're at in that spectrum, that you can see a breakdown very quickly.
It's huge. And this happens all the time. My wife and I had a fight a couple weeks ago. I'm at the bar. I'm watching the Browns game. It was their last regular season game.
You're probably angry because it's the Browns.
Yeah, right. And so they needed to beat the Steelers. So I did. So they did. And it was great. Some people at the bar, some Browns fans. And so I was texting my wife. I said, hey, can I bring some people back from the bar over to the place? She says, don't bring a bunch of people. Okay, got it. Well, I come back home. I invited 2 people over. She's like, what? I told you not to invite anybody. I'm like, you said don't invite a bunch of people. And I don't think 2's a bunch. But again, like this bunch is this weird nebulous concept, right? So to her, 2 was way too many, right? But it wasn't successfully articulated that way. And so, and perhaps I should have said, hey, you said not a bunch. What does not a bunch mean? Because I know that's a very generic term. And again, it's just we let this ish creep into our daily conversations bit by bit, and just twists a little knife into our ribs.
Mm-hmm.
And it just eats apart at our conversation day in, day out. And so our ability to be very purposeful with our words helps so much.
Oh man, if I could just get more effective in the words I'm using, and maybe I'll sit back in the client chair for a minute and ask you to poke some holes in this. So my very basic understanding through my experiences, I always fall back on. I probably now listening to you maybe don't use it correctly, but I say a lot of times, maybe if I'm talking about with my wife or my children, a lot of times I will say, this is my expectation. This is what I'd like to see happen. This is what I want done. Okay. Maybe I don't even give the why. I'd like to see done. And then I'm very upset when that doesn't get taken care of. Maybe the garage cleaned out or the toys picked up off the floor. I set that expectation and it doesn't get done, but there was never an agreement that it should be done. It was just, I said this. There was an acknowledgement that I said it, but there was never an agreement that, okay, now I'm going to execute this. And there was no discussion.
What date, to what standard?
Yeah. And that agreement piece, and I found myself going back to that a lot of times when I get upset, because I will quickly say my expectation was failed in that moment, but I think we have to take it a step farther. too, and using these words, I think, is what I'm trying to say, is what helps us arrive at that agreement, if that's fair, or if I'm missing
well,
that, help me.
absolutely fair, or at a bare minimum, like through this conversation, your ability to look back and again have some emotional intelligence, like, you know what, I wasn't nearly as clear as I thought I was. That's on me, right? And Jocko Willink, I think, is phenomenal for extreme ownership and how he talks about discipline, right? The ability for leaders to own it. If you can, I have a thing called the 4x2.
Okay.
Well, I've switched it. It's now the 2x4, because you have to ask the two questions first. If something goes awry, right, in your life, with your family, with your team, with your friends, your fantasy football league, whatever it is, ask the 2x4.
Okay.
Ask yourself internally two questions. Was I absolutely clear on my expectations? And did I do everything in my power to help that team, individual, whatever, find success?
Mm-hmm.
Ask those two. If either one of those answers are no, don't get pissed. And then because then the four follow-up questions was, what was the expectation? Who led the expectation? Was it really an expectation? And then was it realistic? Right? And so those four questions, by and large, don't matter if you can, for yourself, assess that, you know what, as the leader in this circumstance, I wasn't nearly as articulate as I thought I was. And I just have to chalk this up. And is regardless of how much blame I can put on them, if there's a sliver of blame to put on me, I have to start there. And then now having said that, this does not negate an adult's responsibility to be an MFing adult.
Disclaimer.
And ask some questions and seek clarification and ask why. All right, to do that stuff. If you're just standing by and expecting this to get fed to you, be a good teammate to me too. I'm only human, right? So maybe I can't do everything, or I have to be blunt, and we have to execute, right? So there's some teamwork that has to happen, we just have to have the conversation. We have to sit back, and again, if you're sitting there like, okay, you know what? Okay, I'm pissed. I shouldn't be pissed. If I walk it back, I wasn't clear. I didn't talk dates, times. Stop. But I think a little bit to your point is this: the next time something like that happens, don't leave it up to you to define it. Hear what your wife has to say first. So like, hey, baby, what is your expectation for this? And let her say it. And that way you can kind of see where her mind is wrapped around, and or how misaligned you guys may be to achieve that. Because you're like, wow, I wasn't even close to that. You and I now need to have a conversation because we were going to attack this two completely different ways. So, but again, understanding expectations, it front loads the tough conversations, and it's amazing.
Yeah, that's an incredible tactic for active listening. You hear that term a lot, but that's exactly what you're talking about. And to really mine into where the problem and the root was, and because in most cases it's miscommunication, and how we say it's miscommunication, but if we don't identify that critical piece of what was miscommunicated, we don't arrive where we need to go.
And then there's the added piece that I put through CAPE, which is why I want people to use CAPE to have these conversations. It's not only do you need to have the conversation, it's making people feel safe to have the conversation as well. And I'm not talking kinder, gentler, right? And the world isn't all gumdrops and rainbows. Absolutely get that.
Yeah.
But there are some people who don't like interacting with other people. There are people who don't like conflict. There are people who shy away from a major scene, who don't want to disagree in public, and all this. So if you have a system set up where you make the tough conversations part of the plan, it forces it to happen. And then people can spit out all this stuff without fear of retribution and or reprisal or getting made fun of. And they're able to have the conversations because it is now part of our culture. We will discuss these things every damn time, whether it makes you uncomfortable or not, or whether you think you're going to get judged. You're not. This is part of the new awesome, and we're going to go be awesome.
Yeah, and if you say it's a safe space, it better be a safe space, and we fail people on that a lot, and you need to follow through with that. Where did this start to grow in you, Tim? Like when did all of these you're very self-aware, you're very articulate, you've obviously experienced a lot of this stuff. When did this really grow in you that you want to start to put that out? And again, where I'm going, in transitioning into Cape Lead, what in the military did you see that caused you to want to start to refine this?
I would say around a decade ago, I had one of the toughest personal and professional years of my life. And whether it was in garrison or being deployed to Afghanistan, to carrying my buddy's flag draped body bag, and I mean, it was just tough. And then, I just didn't want to come back home from the deployment for the environment there in garrison. And then that was horrible. And then I didn't realize, God, this hits on so many levels, right? But I had built back in 2004 this thing called the Pachasa 8, and it was my key to having a successful career inside the Air Force. And it was simple. The acronym was Corporal Timid: communication, professionalism, loyalty, teamwork, initiative, motivation, involvement, and development.
Okay.
And you do the first 6 every second of every day with every interaction you have. And the last 2, you do one thing a month in a manner commensurate with your grade and or relative position inside the organization. And this is how you're going to find success. And that is absolutely where my career took off.
Okay.
Right. Like, I mean, I'm living proof that worked. And some of the friends that I've had have stolen it and used it, and they've really loved it because it makes it easy to articulate success as you go through this. I didn't realize it at the time, but those were initial expectations that I gave people. And I didn't realize that my life's work would revolve around this word. And then in 2012, it was just one of those, I kept expecting leaders to get it. I kept expecting them to see the human being behind the uniform, the family behind the beret, all these different things. And I just kept wrapping myself around the axle and I was an absolute mess. I wasn't sleeping. And then it hit me. I'm like, why do I keep expecting them to do this when I know that they've proven time and time again it's past their comprehension, like it's never going to happen. And yet I keep expecting it. That's like, why do I keep expecting it? And then the question that changed my life was, what is an expectation? And you can look in the world is perfectly bipolar when it comes to like Shakespeare said, expectations are the root of all heartache. Brene Brown, whom I absolutely love and subscribe to quite literally everything she says. She is amazing. And if you haven't listened to her or seen her Netflix special, I recommend that to every viewer and or listener.
Right on.
But she says expectations are resentments waiting to happen. Right. And so there's so many quotes that are anti-expectations, letting go of expectations and lowering your expectations means you're never disappointed. Right. That isn't realistic, but it's so weird because the world hates expectations, but leaders love them. Hey, we need to manage expectations. We need to set solid expectations. So why do we have this perfectly bipolar understanding of what expectations are? It's because nobody can define it. And there's one book that has come close. It's called The 100X Leader. Okay. And it's an absolutely phenomenal book. And it's all about, having a Sherpa help you climb Mount Everest.
All right.
We can figure out all the, middle-aged Caucasian white men, right, that have climbed there. But the Sherpas do it all the time. It's a walk in the park for them, but for lack of a better term, right? And they do it all the time. But leadership is so much about that, right? It's about helping people up the mountain because you know what, you're going to get to the top too, right? And so this is a phenomenal book. So he has a chapter. I think the conclusion is a little bit off, but there's like 5 or 6 TED Talks about expectations. They all miss the mark. Like for all kinds of great reasons. And I'm not saying they're bad.
No.
I just get to different conclusions.
Yeah.
Obviously I think I'm right because I'm me. But again, like nobody defines what an expectation is. They talk about how we get expectations and how we can lower expectations, but no one ever defines what I just defined for us.
Yeah. Well, and you hear if you're going to have like the whole goal in the success equation is right. Let's make it measurable so we can see how to do it and then replicate it. But if you don't come back to this precise speech and know what we're talking about, I think it takes away from the measurability of reaching whatever target you were trying to get to. And so that's when I first heard you talk about that's what I keyed in on so much, is that the more we can have that common language, it's going to allow us to be like, where did the breakdown, right? Because I'm very big on that after action. When I have a conversation, right, my end goal of every conversation is to improve my relationship with a person I'm speaking to. And if we don't do that, there was a breakdown. Because I can improve a relationship. I can gain respect from someone by giving them bad news. And I can also destroy any further conversation. And I think the more we can learn of exactly what you're getting at and speaking at, where did the breakdown happen? Because a lot of times we feel it broke down, but we don't know where.
Right. Right. And, and we can't articulate it. And then even more so is like JT was talking about, is if you're in a position of power, you have to admit when you're wrong. Right.
Yeah.
Just because you have rank doesn't absolve you from being wrong. Admit when you're wrong. Now, the thing that I like to talk about people is, let's say you and I are going to have a disagreement, right? It's not whether you and I disagree, right? Because it's not whether you're right or I'm wrong or vice versa. It's whether we get the conversation right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have the presence of mind to focus on this nebulous third entity of, the conversation in air quotes, right? Then our egos are in check. I'm no better or worse. You're no better or worse. We just could have gotten this third party thing a little bit better. So let's talk about that with all of our egos being intact.
Yeah, right on. Okay, so here we go. Let's get practical.
Sure.
I'm at my job. I'm failing. I hate my boss. He's saying expectations. He doesn't know any of this language. I'm just learning some of this language. What do you say to that person? How do you start to apply some of this more, refined and precise speech and apply it to what I'm doing if the person on the other end doesn't know what we're talking about?
Right.
And so that's a problem many people find themselves in, is like, I'm choosing to learn this stuff and become better at my craft and what I'm trying to put out there and help other people, but the person in charge of me isn't taking the time to do any of this. So how do I work through that?
So that's another great question. I don't think it's necessarily the right question though.
Okay.
So it isn't necessarily like, how do I have this conversation with my jerk boss? The first question is, what does a successful conversation look like?
Okay.
Right? So what does a good passage of information look like, human to human, leader to leader, and or like first responder, frontline operator type of thing? Like what can we do to have a good conversation to let you be authentically, uniquely, and beautifully you? Mm-hmm. Allow me to do the same thing, but still communicate on a foundational level that still lets us have tough conversations.
Yeah.
So that ends up being it. So the first thing, so which is why I developed CAPE. So CAPE is my understanding, and obviously my company, but it is four things. It's a way to capture lessons learned. It's a way to resolve interpersonal conflict. It's a leadership methodology, but realistically, the fourth thing is it's a communication infrastructure.
Okay.
And it allows us to successfully articulate, one, what do we care about? Two, how well are we aligned to achieve what we care about, right? So we need alignment. Third part, the P is quickly morphing into a couple different P's. It has always been perspective.
Okay.
Right. So we need to seek at least one outside perspective to make sure that someone else is getting eyes on and maybe picking up something that we're not going to see. But it also allows us to have a conversation about priorities. What do we know about priorities at this time? And we'll go forward from there. And then lastly, the fourth thing, expectations. What are the expectations of this? Not the assumption, not the anticipation, but the expectation as far as we know it. And so if you're that person who you have, if you're listening to this now and you're having a horrible boss, I'm going to be honest with you. If they don't care about leadership, there's nothing that you're going to do that is going to change that. And I can say that because I quit 2 jobs last year because I had a boss who would not do that. And one was a retired Army colonel, right? But was absolutely never wrong. Couldn't convince of wrong. There was always an alibi here and there. And then just couldn't have a conversation, realizing that I don't think you're being as clear as you think you are, right? And or this makes sense to you because you're steeped, you've been doing this for years. I don't have this, so it doesn't make sense to me, right? And so we struggle with that all the time. But the thing that I like about CAPE is if you have the infrastructure, and even if you have a mediocre boss is better, because then you can pull in information, and then you can follow this mindset. Because like for caring, I have an acronym called STOMP: Self, Team, Organization, Mission, and Performance. Mm-hmm. So if you're my boss, Steve, and I'm going to go to you like, hey, boss, let's say that you and I now need to go do something law enforcement wise in New York City to augment Washington, D.C., right? Yeah. And I'm going to come to you like, okay, I've got some concerns for our team, right? Chachi, go ahead, man. So I said, okay, CAPE it, right? Step 1, This is what I care about.
Mhm.
And this is my opportunity to be, for lack of a better term, selfish. And we don't allow people to be selfish. And there's got to be a better word than selfish, like a positive word, because so many people, specifically in law enforcement or first responders or military, are trained to think so selflessly
Mhm.
that thinking about yourself ends up being a bad thing, and it's a bad paradigm, which does make sense.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have to allow for humanity. Because
Yeah,
if you're like, hey,
that's
Chachi,
fair.
pack your bags, we're going to DC for a month and we're going to sleep in a parking lot with only one outlet and one bathroom. Like, well, okay, boss, I have some concerns.
Check.
In order,
Let's talk about this. Yeah.
yeah, so like, I'm going to tell you what I care about,
Mhm.
what I care about for our team, how I think this is going to affect our organization,
Yeah.
how this is going to affect the organization mission. And then lastly, that P part is twofold. It's performance, right? Performance. Hey, this is what happened when we did it last time.
Mhm.
And then also when all is said and done, this is our end around double check for, was the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
So successfully articulate that to you. Then we have a conversation about how well we're aligned to achieve STOMP, self, team, organization, mission, performance.
Mhm.
Then we can talk about perspectives and priorities, different things. And then the last, say, okay, moving forward, what are the expectations, right? I need 8 W's. I need SMART C, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time bound, and clearly communicated.
Yeah.
So 8W, 5C really gets you towards an expectation quickly.
Right on, man. No, and having those systems in place ahead of time that everyone you have buy-in from that, man, like not that there's not going to be breakdowns and failures, but the quicker we can identify and take responsibility, and even for that person that is not satisfied in their daily work because of maybe relationships, taking responsibility. I heard you talk about a chicken analogy.
Yes. Yes.
Can you tell me more about that in terms of responsibility?
So it's funny, right? Because when we talk about, when
I
I
love
think in
this,
terms
yeah.
of expectations, you can think in terms of past, present, and future.
Uh-huh.
The quickest way to explain an expectation is by breaking it down in the past, which is where I do the 2x4. We already talked 2x4.
Yeah. Yep.
Understanding expectations in the present tense is like the 8W and Smart C, right? That's how we do it. And then moving to the future, like expectations in the future, you have to prepare to be wrong. And this is where I get so bent out of shape, because people have such a tough time admitting that they're imperfect. Like rarely, if ever, have I ever had a perfect conversation, or have I ever had a perfect interaction with anybody about anything.
Yeah.
Rarely, if ever, but somehow we can acknowledge when we end up being wrong. So the example that I use is, you need to be prepared to be wrong. And this is where I think people screw up right and wrong daily. I mean, like, if not like secondly, right? This is happening like in the past 10 seconds, 100,000 people have just screwed this up. I can absolutely promise you. Because here's the deal. If I'm going to have you over to my house here in beautiful rainstormy Phoenix, Arizona today,
Yeah.
And cook you chicken breast, and I season the chicken breast, I put it on the grill, and it's great. And then you get it and it's perfect, just the way you like it. And you cut into it, and you can look in the middle part of the chicken. And with your, say, the military, like Mark 1 calibrated eyeball, you can see that chicken breast is in fact 51% cooked.
Uh-huh.
The question that I ask every audience that I go to is like, would you eat it? And it's always resounding, no, that's gross. Disgusting. But
how hungry are you?
yeah, right. But then I come back and say, I don't get it. It's 51% cooked. It's more cooked than it is raw. I don't see what the problem is. And then everyone would be like, I don't think you're seeing this for what it is. You're asking me to eat 49% of raw chicken. Like, there's a reason there's no chicken tartare, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have to fix this. Well, this is how we screw up right and wrong all the time. We are rarely, if ever, 100% right. And if I'm 51% right about something, and I declare a winner, I start doing finger 6-shooter in the sky, right? I'm 51% right. I'm good. I win. Yay. But I deprive my people of the conversation, of the 49% of wrong that I brought to that conversation, that I brought to that task, that I brought to the event. You know, if I don't have a conversation about 49%, they're going to hate me, and they're going to hate me quickly.
Yeah.
But
Man.
What is my capacity to see that I don't want people to eat raw chicken? I want to acknowledge that maybe I should put things back on the grill. Maybe I can understand that I could have cooked it longer. I could have done better. I could have taken any action to make this a better piece of chicken, that I could eliminate the wrong that I brought. Because like, even as a chief or a command chief inside an Air Force wing, my first wing, we had 2,400 people, and I'm the senior enlisted dude for that. And they're like 1,800 of them were enlisted people, right?
Yeah.
And so if I'm the
Wow.
senior dude, could I be 90% right and ignore the 10% of wrong that
That's
I
a
brought
lot
to
of
the table?
people. That's a lot of people. That's
You know,
impacting.
that's a lot of impact.
Yeah.
And so people just don't think about right and wrong in those terms. Like, you're never, I mean, and again, hyperbole, you're never 100% right. Never, ever, ever, right? Because a lot of times, even when we are right, our tone makes us wrong.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and that 49%, as soon as you're willing to acknowledge that, I think that's where like compassion and empathy and those emotional intelligence aspects starts to creep in, and realize that, like, yeah, maybe I got this to the point that it would be successful, but what is that going to cause? What's the ripple effect of say just a successful mission? How many things now do I have to fix because we went ahead with, and executed on what was mostly right?
You know, and then there's a time and a place, right? I don't, like, Star Wars fan, right? Only Siths deal in absolutes, right? So there's a time and a place for everything. I'm not gonna say
Yeah.
there isn't, but our ability to see the humanity, to see the beauty of the human weapon system, the beauty of the individual contributor who is choosing, in my life, the people that I'm around, like first responders, right, and policemen and firefighters and military and everything else, they're choosing to put their lives in harm. Like, they're making a significant contribution. They're putting their life on the line, and we don't owe them better than, well, I don't owe them that 49%. I absolutely owe them that 49%.
Yeah. And that better be
that
on
way,
your mind. Yeah.
yeah. And then that way, like when the time comes where I do need to tell them, hey, just Charlie, Mike, you got to continue mission, go execute now. We'll have built that relationship. Like, okay, Chachi's serious, right? He knows this, but we'll have that relationship where it's not bad. They're not butthurt about it, and we understand that this situation calls for that type of communication.
Awesome. Right on. Well, that explains Cape Lead. How, like, tell me about Cape Lead and what you offer, and how you're able to come in and start to communicate some of these ideas for, I mean, who's it directed at? Who's your audience?
My audience is absolutely anybody. My first client was a medical artificial intelligence company out of Columbus, Ohio.
How about that? Right on.
And so the CEO there, Sean, was just an amazing person who heard some of my podcasts and wanted to talk more about it. So, super thankful for the team at Olive. They do this medical artificial intelligence, and they're just exploding with success.
Mm-hmm.
So kudos to the entire Olive team. But again, like, for me, all my stuff, it can, if you want to hire me for a team, like, I do individual coaching, and realistically, so much of this is, half of this is just getting out of your own way.
Yeah, how about that?
And I mean that for all the best reasons, and or at least being able to point holes, because I think we all understand that we have blind spots, right? Everybody gets that. But the thing about this is, you need feedback to learn your blind spots, because they're your blind spot. And people don't get that concept. Like, someone else needs to tell me this, because it's my effing blind spot. I'm never going to see it until somebody tells me. But then again, going back to that podcast with JT, people get so butthurt because they think that a critique is judgment, and it's not a critique. I'm sorry, it's not judgment. It's simply, hey, you did this wrong. Not, you did this wrong because you're a moron. You just happen to do this wrong. Let's fix it, and then move on.
Acknowledge
and
it.
So, and it's just, and so all this, and like the first thing that I tell people is, like, if you want to talk to me about a leadership development program, stop right there. I don't want to do that, because step one is about a human development program. Because if I teach leadership tactics to an emotionally stupid narcissist, they're going to use a lot of that stuff for nefarious reasons.
Yeah.
And not like twisting mustache, type of evil, but you're not going to have the it's like the example I use with JT. It's like, it's trying to change out your oil by adding more oil to your engine. Right? If you just add oil, that's not going to get the job done. Right? You really need, or like, if you're going to paint something, if you try and paint something without priming it, it's not going to stick. Yeah. It's not going to stick, and you're just going to have to. It's just going to be worse off. You'll spend more time and money because you didn't do it right the first time. So my first steps for my quote unquote leadership development program is human development. And I
Okay.
teach 5 hard skills: emotional intelligence, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, for which I'm an authorized practitioner of that.
Right
I
on.
talk about mindfulness. I
Hmm.
talked about prevailing theories of motivation. And then I talk about a communication infrastructure and shared vernacular to
Mm.
make sure that we're using the right words and that we all value these words to the same level, because we have different value systems, and words is important, and we're going to screw it up if we're not purposeful.
Yeah, and taking those things and you know having that base of understanding and then transitioning into action and actually starting to lead people well. Do you talk to folks, or do you have any thoughts on, say, a leader that's trying to implement these things, that really cares about someone? Um, are there practical things that they can see how it's working, other than maybe just feeling good? And I know, you know, it's I'm not necessarily landing on one specific thing, but where it's like, I'm trying to implement these things, I'm failing. How do I know where I'm failing? Is that where somebody like you comes in and can help identify those? Do you have to gain that outside perspective, or what's kind of the test for all of these things that we're trying to do to better lead people?
Yeah, I so there's a lot of stuff that I think I can help with, because a lot of it's just a disinterested third party, right? To take an objective look at your strengths and weaknesses. And
Yeah.
so I put my clients through a battery of tests.
Okay.
For Myers-Briggs type indicator, make them take Angela Duckworth's grit test.
Okay.
I have them do an Enneagram test. I have them
Hmm.
do a DOTS test,
Okay.
because regardless of your personality, the way you communicate has its own personality.
Hmm.
That's studies done by this New Zealand company. So that's been very interesting. I
Right
have
on.
them take a character test that spits out 24 words, and they rank them from most impactful to least impactful for how you identify with these 24 character words. And you have like the Myers-Briggs stuff that shows you just by your personality where you're prone to succeed, where you're prone to fail as a leader, as a follower, as a significant other, as a parent, right? All those different things to open up some of those blind spots. And once we can acknowledge that, then we can probably figure out things that with small tweaks, you can have better interactions and better connections.
Can I ask you what you are in the Myers Briggs?
So I'm an ENTJ.
An ENTJ. Okay, very good. I'm a ISTJ.
Okay, nice.
I'm an ISTJ. Right on. No, man, that's phenomenal. And your website it really has a wealth of knowledge, and it looks like you're really building that out. And so I'll absolutely make sure people are linked up with that, and all that will be in the show notes. So kudos on that. It looks great, and it looks like you're just putting together an incredible user-friendly platform for people to engage with as well.
I'm trying to put together a menu, for lack of a better term, right? Because there's so many people, you see them like the new, people say, well, I'm a transactional leader, or I'm a transformational leader, right? This is what I try to do. Like I tell people, like, this isn't about you having a leadership style.
Mhm.
This is about you having every leadership style.
Hmm.
So you can apply the requisite style towards the individual and or group you're trying to lead and help them find success.
Yeah.
And again, it's not up to them to adjust to you. And that's been leadership from the dawn of time up until like this conversation, right? And that's what leaders are like. I'm the leader. I tell you what to do. You go do it. What are your questions? Right. And
Yeah.
that has gone the way of the dodo. Like we have, because people are so purposeful in what they do these days.
Mhm.
And they're specifically and significantly trained in these areas of expertise, and that's what they want to dive into. So we really need to recognize their contribution. We
Yeah.
really need to recognize their contribution to, because they're making a purposeful choice to be right where they are at that minute. And so many people don't value that, and
Yeah.
we miss out on something epic when we just treat them like the herd.
Yeah, applaud that, let them.
100%.
Yeah, no, that's good, man. And that positivity I hear from you, I mean, it's shining through, man. It's coming through. So I just kind of exhort you in that, man. This whole conversation has been that way. And so, that's awesome. I really am curious. I like to ask my guests this. What are you learning right now that really rises to the top? Clearly, you're constantly trying to evolve your craft and understanding and better, your own situation in terms of what you know and how you lead people. But what are you learning right now? What has your attention in this age that we're in?
So for me, I'm trying to consume as many books as I possibly can.
Okay.
And what I'm looking for right now is somebody to have already discovered what I've discovered. I'm actively looking for that. I've got a book here on, this is the closest thing that I found, interpersonal expectations.
There you go. That
And
looks like a
this
recent
is,
picture on the front.
so this is the Cambridge University Press. And this came out decades ago. And it is a painful book to get through. Sorry, I was 2 years old when this book came out. But so there's a lot of good knowledge here, but nobody's held on to this.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the conclusions that were true then aren't necessarily true now in either contemporary American or contemporary world society. So we need to adjust the practical application of really just interpersonal connection. And this is all it is, because the thing that I've been chasing down was, hey, I'm a leader. I study leadership. I don't study leadership. And for the longest time now, I've been saying I actually study communication, right? And so I teach in interpersonal communication.
100%.
I don't, right? That's a subset of, I believe in connecting human beings. And so me trying to shape a conversation to successfully articulate that, because like Einstein said, if you can't explain it in basic terms, then you don't know it well enough. Well, and it's taken me all these years to build this understanding where hopefully, I'm explaining, and it seems like based on the interview with JT, right, it seemed to have hit with great success.
Yeah. Or
at least moderate, right? I don't know what great is.
Yeah.
So just being able to shape a conversation for people that lets them see that they can probably do better.
Yeah.
And just with small tweaks, you can fix this, because the thing with leadership is it's hard to prove the negative, right? If you're like Amazon has this amazing growth, amazing growth. And, over the past 15, 20 years, I have so many of my friends here in the Phoenix area work for Amazon, and then they've built into a system. So now they have, ignorantly spoken, right, a militaristic type of setup and a hierarchy of jobs and ranks and positions, how you can grow. And so I love that. But then the more I talk to my friends, or the more that I even just talk to my wife and I had a rough patch a couple of years ago, and I was gone for 2 years, didn't know if we were going to make it through. And it was really, really rough. But so much of that problem was all the conversations we never had. And there's a phenomenal line in the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Okay. And Angelina Jolie, she says it in the very beginning. She and Brad Pitt are going through counseling, right? How apropos. But she says, it's like there's this space between us, and it keeps filling up with everything we didn't say.
Wow.
And that is absolutely so rock star understanding for leadership, because if you're my boss, the thing that happens is, like, you may do something that frustrates me, but I don't say anything. And then this happens again and again and again. And this blank space between us keeps filling up with all the things that I never tell you, because I don't want to tell you. You're my boss, or it may be something small, but it might be one of your blind spots. Yeah. Right. And you're never going to see your blind spot because it's your blind spot. Right. It becomes
a massive chasm. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so all of a sudden, like, we deprive people of good conversations, and then a lot of it of fear of retaliation, or maybe they're not emotionally intelligent, and maybe they've proven that from time to time, which I've been there too. And sometimes you're just in a shitty spot, and you can't do anything with it.
Yeah, that's hard.
But yeah, so I just like this whole human connection piece, and the fact that all the study that I've done isn't necessarily about leadership. Leadership is just a byproduct of how we can treat other human beings.
Yeah. No, I think I hope this is kind of a fair analogy. What I love about what you're doing is it's almost like this firewall that exists when you focus on the human side of this, where I feel like all the content and leadership stuff that's available to people now, we have a lot of people in leadership positions that manipulate that information, and they take it and say, I'm doing this stuff really well, and they just start forcing different words at people, and they set all of these, different things to say, oh, I heard this, we need to do this as a business, or I'm going to pull from this guy, and we start just attacking the problem in terms of task-oriented leadership. But I see that barrier that if you try and do what you're putting out there, you're not able to just throw these little like tidbits at it. Like you need to do the whole thing and do it really well. And I know that was very general and kind of what I said, but that's kind of what I see, which is absolutely what I love. Or I got to give a little space, and if you could just give a shout out, like we've referenced your interview with JT, and these guys are incredible what they're doing. And I'm sure all the viewers, if they haven't tuned in, probably will at some point. Would you just talk about just that for a second? What kind of came out from that interview, and who those guys are? Just because I think it's worthy to acknowledge exceptional people and exceptional companies and things, and I want to do that.
You bet. So a couple weeks ago, I was on a podcast called the Free Range American Podcast, and it's hosted by Black Rifle Coffee Company. Mm-hmm. So Black Rifle Coffee is a veteran-owned and operated coffee store, and it is absolutely booming. And so with guys like Evan Hafer, Matt Best, and Jared Taylor, they've been really building this into something special. Mm-hmm. And what started as some guys just doing some YouTube videos and just some guys with some entrepreneurial spirit, they've really, through blood, sweat, and tears. And again, it's taken them years to be an overnight success, right? And we kind of hear that all the time. But any money that they would have made throughout these years, they've never taken. They reinvested into the business to help out with just infrastructure or supply chain management and things of that nature. So they put out great videos. They put out quality coffee. And then they started the Drinking Bros podcast. And now they have Free Range American podcast, right? So they just had JP Sears on there the other night, who's this awesome comedian. He does, great videos. Congressman Dan Crenshaw has been on there, right? The Hodge twins have been on these things. And so they've had some phenomenal talent. So check out the Free Range American podcast. Now, Jared Taylor, he was an Air Force TAC P like me. So we had the same career and traveled in similar circles until he got out of the Air Force a few years ago. And now that I'm retired and we've stayed friends and colleagues. And so he had me out there because I was going to work with his production crew to help on my podcast and new video stuff that I want to put out there. Yeah. And he said, hey, hop on the podcast here. We'll do a quick one with you. We think you got a cool story that people should hear.
Right on. No, it's phenomenal. And well, lead right in. So what can people expect to hear on your show? And how do they find it?
Yeah, so you can go on any, look for any podcast anywhere. Just look for Cape Lead, CAPELEAD, or capelead.com, and just tune in for different things. And realistically, it's just about trying to simplify and or decipher what I think we're probably missing through human interaction, and just trying to point out different things. And from the podcast before, whether we're talking about obedience versus discipline, we talk about the DIKW versus the hope, anticipation, or assumption, anticipation, expectation piece, and then move forward that way. Each one, by and large, is purposefully 20 minutes or less. I want to give you a point. I want you to listen to that. So if you want to go back and reference it later, it's very easy to do. You don't have to sift through hours of content, to move forward.
Yeah.
I've got a YouTube channel. Just look up Cape Lead Leadership. Now, and that's me interviewing senior leaders primarily from the United States Air Force. A lot of E9s, a general or two, a lot of colonels, things of that nature. Right. And just hearing their thoughts on leadership and what we do for our people. And so I just want to help. I want people to go home at the end of the day knowing 5 things. They did what they could with what they had at that time, regardless of the circumstance and whether you wanted to or not. And I think if you can roger up to those 5 things, you'll have had a successful day. It may not be a good day. It may be a very, very hard day, but you will have had a successful day, because the answers that we get today may be wrong tomorrow. And that's absolutely fine. We do what we can with what we have at that time. And so, we end up moving forward, but it takes a whole lot of people to understand the infrastructure for how we communicate, how we can speak with the right words, how we can remove the ish from all of our interactions. And again, just make better people happier.
Right on. Chachi, what did we miss?
I don't know. Like this has been going by so quickly. And again, this is just you reaching out, and then from our phone call, just 2 passionate people who have podcasts, just trying to make better people, to help sift through life's BS and just to help people connect and because life is tough enough.
Yeah.
and so you don't need any help making life any tougher. So anything that podcast can do to put content out there that maybe alleviate frustration or lighten the load in some way, or just make people laugh or do whatever. I mean, so thank you for doing this, and thank you for doing me the honor of having me on your show.
No, it's all mine, man. I appreciate it. One more time, just tell everyone where they can connect with you at.
You bet. So the first one's easy. You can text me. You can call me. My number is 602-621-0821. So call or text. Keep in mind, I have a 4-month-old at home, and I'm on Mountain Time right now, so that may be off for some time zones.
Hey, your return call was quick, man.
Chachi, CHACHI at capelead.com. You can find me at Chachi Pachasa on Instagram. Last name is Pachasa. Twitter at Tim Pachasa. Leave a message for me on the Cape Lead Facebook page. I mean, whatever you got to do. I just want to have the conversations, and I just want to make people better, and I want them to have richer engagements, whether it's leadership or personal life or spouse or kids or friends or your fantasy football team. Like, I just want people to smile, and I think especially in today's circumstances and in today's society, we need a lot happier people out there.
Yeah, brother. Your authenticity, your humility, man, it shines through. I'm all into what you're doing, man. And if there's any way the Interrupted Podcast and what we're doing in our community can help you out, please let me know. I look forward, hopefully, to have more conversations with you. And so there'll be definitely things moving forward. We'll sync everything up and get people in touch with you. I just want to say to all the listeners out there and viewers out there, definitely get in touch with Chachi, because what he's offering to you is it's really incredible in terms of everything that is out there on the internet, on YouTube, whatever's out there. This is really mined down and practical wisdom that you can put into play. And though you may fail one time, just go back, re-listen to some of your shows that you got, brother, and then try and get it right, because we're constantly trying to improve. And you're doing it, man. I love your story. I know, we only got into a small piece of it. You're an incredible man. So thank you. Just a pleasure, an incredible conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to doing this again, and can't wait to host you on the Cape Lead Revolution.
Looking forward to it, man. All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Cheers.
And there you have it. There was the show. I hope you were blown away. I hope you had a notepad close by to take down some notes and listen to Chachi. Please go to his website, subscribe to his podcast, subscribe to his show. There's so much wisdom in what he is putting out and all the content that he has for you, and get involved with what Chachi's doing. I completely support him and his mission and everybody at Cape Lead that's contributing to that mission. So that was an exciting conversation for me. I had a lot of takeaways, definitely sat and reflected on that quite a bit. So thank you for tuning in today. Definitely go to interruptme.org and connect with us. Send me a message on the socials, and I look forward to communicating with you and hearing everything that is going on in your life and how you are striving, you're having successes, and as these interruptions are coming your way, you are taking all of the lessons that you've learned, being able to apply them, tactically approach these situations, have a positive attitude, and crush each and every one of your goals every day. I wanted to let you know, you heard it right at the end of the show where Chachi mentioned that I was able to join him on the Cape Lead Revolution. And I'll tell you right now, we had an incredible conversation. You get to hear a little bit more of my story on that show and some of my experiences and the many things that I am learning about leadership, both the having successes and failures in that gamut. But it is incredible to be able to speak with him, and I'm incredibly grateful that he allowed me to come on his show. So definitely be looking towards that show in the next few weeks, and I'll make sure I link it up and get it out to you as soon as that releases. So be looking for that on the horizon. Please don't forget to like and share and subscribe to the podcast. Just pick one person that you know and send it out to them. Say, hey, check out this message that Chachi was able to talk about on the Interrupted Podcast, and I appreciate all the support you're giving. So thank you for allowing me to interrupt your day. Thank you for listening to the Interrupted Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Interrupted Podcast and on Instagram at the Interrupted_podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review in order for us to continue to spread the word about preparing for and embracing life's interruptions.